The endgame raid scene in the Elder Scrolls Online is the weakest I've seen it in my years of endgame raiding. Honestly, it's not just endgame PvE, it's any sort of ESO endgame in general. PvE is dying, the PvP endgame scene is dying, and I'm even hearing people who are super into housing and questing getting bored and taking a break as well. And the sad reality right now is that there's never been a better time to take a break from the game, because for those of us who have been playing for a decade, we've finally run out of things to do. This video isn't intended as some sort of doomsday message declaring that the Elder Scrolls Online is a dead game and to pack up before it's too late before the end of the world. No. This video is meant to invoke a conversation about what has brought us to this point, but more importantly, some ideas about how to fix it. I want this video to be something that can be good, clear, and concise feedback that outlines what the player base is feeling and hopefully provides some realistic solutions that at a minimum could create some inspiration for the devs to work with. For that reason, it is paramount that you voice your opinion about this topic in the comments section below. Please do so respectfully. Disrespect and lazy comments I'm just gonna delete and not even bother with. The Dunning-Kruger effect for gamers is unbelievable in a lot of regards. We like to pretend that we know how game development works, but whenever we try to voice opinions, solutions, and criticisms, we often end up looking like Jerry and Gluty trying to develop an app.
Did you want to develop an app?
I'll pass, Gluty.
Your loss.
50-50, final offer.
Saying things like the devs don't listen, care, or are lazy in and of itself is just objectively not true and lazy. So think a little more critically before you post. I've been remarkably blessed in my life to have some of the opportunities that I've had to work directly with some incredible people whose passion is developing this game. Every lunch or dinner that I was a part of during my time at QuakeCon, whenever you're around these devs, all they do is talk shop. You can hear it in their voice, you can see it in their actions and their ideas. I mean, they're constantly just thinking about their work. I have nothing but the utmost respect for them. And having the chance to experience the passion that the developers of ESO have for their life's work is maybe one of the most inspiring things I've ever had the privilege to encounter. I hope many of you are willing to take my word for that. Now that said, everything that I have to say comes from a similar point of passion, as ESO in a variety of ways has also become my life's work, and seeing my endgame community dissipating has been genuinely devastating. I think to understand why players are so unhappy, we need to understand what makes this game so special. In my history as a gamer, I've always preferred first-person shooters. I was an avid Call of Duty and Halo player until I was about 15, when the Elder Scrolls Online came out. I had never touched an MMO, I'd never touched an RPG, but my friend was so into Skyrim that he was adamant that I give the game a shot. I got trapped in the world of Tamriel instantly, starting my experience in ESO as an avid quester, going for Cadwell's Gold until the Maw of Lorcaj came out, and then DPS started to matter, so I began farming gear for the first time and started parsing. I didn't have much of an interest in endgame content at the time. It was too hard and I just did not have the time to progress. That was until Elsewhere, with the release of the Necromancer and one of the most fond trial experiences that I still have to date, Sunspire. The mount associated with the trifecta was by far the coolest thing that had ever come to the game, and I had to have it. The fact that the trifecta was borderline impossible on console was all the more incentive. To walk around Craglorn and have the entire zone crowd around the spectacular Sench was a dream that I was determined to make a reality. I knew that it wasn't going to happen in months or maybe even years, but I was going to become good enough to do it. Fast forward years later, and I am now an avid endgamer. Something as simple as a really cool mount set the foundation to create a player that has achieved every single trifecta on tank, healer, and DPS, who has set multiple console records and even has a console's first as a damage dealer, and soon I'll hope to hold world records on PC as a tank, and who has even outparsed players considered to be the best to ever touch the game. By far the most important thing that I do now, though, is teach endgame to anyone interested. I spent endless hours teaching endgame progressions in both the casual teaching run setting and the far more intense hardcore setting. Now, I say all of this to point out that none of this would have ever happen without an incentive to invest an ungodly amount of time into endgame content. Today, though, the rewards for getting into the most difficult content in the game are few and not worth the effort. And what little rewards we do get for these milestone achievements are lackluster at best, especially compared to what exists in the Crown Store. Even for players who have fallen in love with endgame the way that I have, there is no longer any replayability aspect of any content, something that has never truly existed in this game, but did used to at least kind of exist in the form of chasing titles and achievements on multiple characters. Finally, even for those tackling new content, the biggest draw to ESO, its combat system, is the most dull, boring, and monotonous iteration of the system that we've ever seen. It hasn't changed in 3 years. These are the 3 key topics that I seek to explore in this video. The unfortunate truth, though, is that none of the points that I'd like to make matter if endgame anything in ESO continues to not be a priority. I mean no disrespect by saying this, but it's pretty clear that investing the necessary resources into cultivating strong endgame scenes in ESO is not of high enough importance. Let's take a brief moment to do a little bit of market research together. Perhaps the greatest competitor that ESO needs to analyze right now is WoW. WoW's endgame PvE and PvP communities are arguably the strongest in any existing MMO to date. Even at that, the endgame PvE scene in WoW is a mere fraction of its total population, with maybe 100 total clears of the newest and most difficult piece of content compared to the tens of thousands of clears in easier iterations of it. Yet, its Race to Worlds First garnered hundreds of thousands of views between Twitch and YouTube, while the game itself has had the most subscriptions on release of The War Within than ever before in recent history. When you have an MMO that has this level of attention and viewership surrounding its endgame, it's bound to draw new and old player interest. Competition is ingrained in our DNA as gamers, and you don't have to be somebody capable of competing to enjoy it. There are millions of football fans around the world, NFL fans who will never dream of playing pro, that will still turn on the TV every Sunday and watch football for 8 hours straight. WoW has been out for 20 years, and I can personally testify that I was never interested in the game until I saw it had over 100k viewers on Twitch with the release of its major expansion. Anybody who plays video games has at least heard the title World of Warcraft, and when you randomly look on Twitch one day to see hundreds of thousands of people watching this game at a time, something in you says, what's going on here? I had no clue what was happening, but I followed the Race to Worlds First. I watched Team Liquid win, and I started playing the game as a result. But a big part of cultivating attention around the game involves creating an environment where players want to compete. And part of what encourages players to participate in these intense competitions is not only this type of attention, but the exclusivity associated with these achievements. WoW breaks its major expansion into seasons, and achieving the most difficult feats in raiding will get you unique titles and mounts that are only earnable that season, and even PvP will offer similar rewards for finishing in the top 1% of players at the end of a season. Competitions and trophies attract attention to your endgame scene in an MMO. Period. I mean, this has been seen even so many times in ESO's history, when Nephis streamed for 500,000 people during Genesis's Mindbender run, even though they lost the Race to Worlds First because they didn't log on in time. This is seen in my own viewership on Twitch, which expands 4 to 5 times when we do the ESO esports events. Now, of course, I think this is being picked up on, made pretty obvious by the back-to-back years of this type of an event at QuakeCon. So credit to the people involved there for sure, but my hope is that the people in charge of making the biggest decisions for the future of ESO pick up on the potential to expand something like this and understand what it could mean for the future of the game if they were to truly invest in this type of experience. The endgame scene in ESO, with the exception of the QuakeCon events, gets little to no attention, with the winners of our World's First still not even being acknowledged. Endgame is just not a big enough priority for ESO, and I'd have to assume that it's because ESO attempts to appeal to a broader audience in the realm of more casual and new players. This could be a completely valid approach, but the new player experience in ESO is worse than maybe any other MMO that exists currently. I'll dive into this claim a lot more later on. But furthermore, if your focus is solely on getting new players, but you don't have any well-established content to keep those new players playing the game for years, since this is an MMO attempting to span decades, you end up with new players trying something new, the new thing being cool for a couple of months, and then inevitably quitting when they don't have anything interesting left to do or no healthy endgame community to help these new players bridge the gap. A healthy endgame doesn't have to be the absolute top priority, but it has to be a cornerstone in a healthy MMO long term. Perhaps one of the biggest indicators to me that suggest ESO endgame isn't a priority is the way balance is handled. We learned a lot recently about the way the devs go about balancing sets, and don't get me wrong, balancing in an MMO is obviously important. However, when you address balancing issues, you don't do so by nerfing sets and skills that are currently being used for the meta progression.
The way that you remove metas is you take the stuff that's falling behind, that's not in meta, and you buff it. You don't take the things that are working, you nerf the shit out of them. It doesn't work that way. The moment you do that, you've created a worse meta. You've created a toxic meta because people are upset, and now they have to look for something that actually works. It's a bad direction. in terms of development.
For example, the suggested changes to Azure during the Update 44 PTS cycle were initially catastrophic. This is a set that we knew was broken for the last year, and that we anticipated changes to with the last patch of 2023, to be frank. This would have been okay. However, over a year later, groups have become accustomed to the power of a set like Azure, and their ability to progress newer content in a lot of cases is based on the damage that they're able to do with this meta set. When you allow players to progress with a strong set like that for months and then rip it away without offering any alternatives, any new toys to make up a big enough difference, groups regress. Regression is maybe the absolute worst thing that you could possibly introduce into an endgame rating scene. Now, as we can clearly see, a lot of these changes were eventually reversed, but that came with a lot of griping about people not wanting the set to change. It's the initial idea that I fundamentally have a problem with. Even though this set is yet another case where the devs listen to feedback. So that's what this is, feedback. People want things to get easier as time goes on. People don't want to progress content for 2 months only for it to get harder than it was supposed to be. That's not what they signed up for. It feels like the implications to the meta and therefore the rating experience is either not often or not thoroughly considered and tested when it comes to proposed balance changes in a lot of cases. And it's a bold claim to say that the devs don't take into consideration the meta when rebalancing meta sets. This very well may not be the case. However, this is how it comes across. So realistically, it's one of two scenarios. Either endgame progression isn't enough of a consideration, or the process is broken. I find the latter far more reasonable. I have records in this game, and I still learn new things about it every week. If somebody who has no-lifed the game to the degree that I have doesn't understand every intricacy in detail, how could you possibly expect the developers to be able to foresee every implication of a change? What you as a player have to understand is that ESO is their 9 to 5. In most cases, they're not going to work on the game for 8 hours a day, come home, and then participate in sweaty endgame raid progressions for another 4 to 6 hours. Hell, when I was in music school, I hated listening to music for fun because I listened to it 8 hours a day for study. I get that. It's unreasonable to expect any developer to be as good at the game as the best players in the game are. In fact, it's impossible. Now, it's clear that they recognize this too. There are some phenomenal players and minds that I know for a fact have gone to work for this game, but maybe the issue is that there aren't enough of them. If ESO was able to use the minds of some of the greatest testers in this game before an update even hit the PTS, the meta in ESO would not only be far more stable, it would be far easier to mix up the meta every now and then as well. Could you imagine a world where Charles, Rai, Alduin, Zoifas, and Skinny Cheeks, God willing ambition, sat down and tested proposed changes and ideas? The meta in endgame PvE would become so stable and healthy. So up to this point, we've talked about the importance of establishing a healthy endgame and the main reasons that I believe the endgame scene isn't being made a high enough priority in ESO. Now it's time to talk about what has come as a result. The 3 biggest issues I mentioned earlier are a good place to start. Incentives, a lack of content and a lack of replayability in that content, and the most dull iteration of the combat system that we've ever seen in ESO. So let's start with the big one, rewards and incentives. The endgame community has communicated for years now that we are remarkably unsatisfied with the rewards endgame content offers. I can't describe the frustration of logging on to the PTS every year and seeing another mount that might look decent, but that we know will easily be outdone in the crown store a few short months later, before most players are even able to achieve the new mount. The Godslayer mount was revolutionary in styles and effects on its launch, and since then, every trifecta mount has been mediocre at absolute best. Half the fun of doing difficult content is being able to show off your achievement, and in an MMO, show it off in style. Players have also viciously griped about body markings for God knows how long. People were far more okay with skins that they didn't like, but that were flashy and recognizable, than body markings that you can barely see on a character. The purple skin from VCR is commonly viewed as one of the ugliest skins in the game, yet everybody in Endgame wanted it at one point just to show off. Lastly, nobody in Endgame remotely cares about titles. Somehow, they've become the coolest part of the trifecta rewards though, and is really the only discussion point every year. With no cool incentives to bring interest to Endgame rating, the same way that the Godslayer mount brought me into the scene, no casual or new player is going to remotely give a trifecta prog the time of day. These Endgame progressions take months, and for what? Well, for me and for those who have been doing this for a while, we progress endgame content because we've fallen in love with the game. We love doing trials, we love raiding, and most importantly, we love doing it with our friends and we love doing it in this game. Most people won't even get the chance to fall in love with Endgame though, because they don't have any reason to try. Say for example, 1% of every player that attempts a difficult piece of content continues doing so and is introduced into the world of Endgame raiding. If only 10% of the community tries, that 1% is going to be a really small number. If 60 to 70% of the players at least try and still only 1% of players continue on this path, the growth in Endgame becomes massive. I think an even bigger point that players are having a far more difficult time realizing and communicating though is that the true reward incentive for playing a video game is for a power increase. It feels like since Lost Depths, ESO has just been afraid to make any changes, hinging on the amount of change as the de facto failure in Update 35. There were a lot of reasons that Lost Depths wasn't well received, but simple change is not one of those things. In a game that's 10 years old, we want combat to occasionally feel different or it gets boring. And I don't mean new skills to use in the same type of rotational context that we've used them in for the last 3 years. I mean a genuine change in feel to the way a class plays. Even more than this, we want new toys. The fact that Coral Riptide has been a meta set for almost 3 years at this point is just so goofy. The resource minigame feels terrible, first of all, but you're telling me that 2 trials later, not a single new fun meta set has come out of them? Good sets that fit the current balancing structure, sure, but not anything that has really changed the meta. It's okay for a big change to occur once every 6 months to a year. And if that change is even expected with, say, the brand new chapter, all the more better. The way ESO balances sets right now has just made everything so bland and dull. But I'll reserve that conversation more for when I talk about the current state of combat. In terms of power incentive, look at Necrom versus Gold Road. Necrom was remarkably successful, not just because there was a new class, but because that new class was a complete freaking game changer. It completely changed the way that we comp, the way we did damage. It was so strong and it made old content feel easier. The power increase was so evident. And not only that, there was new content scaled around that power increase in Sanity's Edge. Gold Road, on the other hand, presents conceptually the coolest system ESO has ever seen. But to what effect? None of the skills with the new scribing system are worth using for damage dealing. And the only scribed ability I'll slot on my damage dealer is Banner Bearer, and it's fucking passive. I don't even get to use it. It doesn't change anything that I do. Okay, that's not true. It actually dulls down my rotation. The way ESO tries to keep everything balanced is the exact reason it's failing. Again, that's not to say that everything should be insanely broken all the time. You obviously need balance in an MMO, but new toys need to be fun more than mounts need to be cool. But even if these rewards and power incentives were satisfied, what reason do players have to continue? Lucent Citadel is one of the absolute coolest trials that we've ever seen. I haven't really heard anyone have anything negative to say about it outside of the trial's relatively easy difficulty compared to previous day 1 content. By day 1 content, I mean Rock Grove on day 1, Dreadsail on day 1, just for some context. However, almost every person I play with or have played with in the past got caught up on their trifectas this year. They got their Mindmender just before Lucent Citadel came out, and then they got the Lucent Citadel trifecta in a couple of months, and now they're on break until the new trial comes out next year. That is a massive issue. There's no reason for players to continue doing endgame content right now. Historically, the replayability in endgame revolved merely around titles, which was weak, but at least something. If somebody already had Godslayer, they could go back and get it on some weird off-meta character for both some extra fun and maybe even an extra challenge. Or they could attempt to get the trifecta on their tank, healer, and DD. That disappeared with account-wide achievements, and the only replayability aspect that exists is score pushing. Unless you are the best of the best though, you don't realistically have a chance to go far in this field. And the amount of effort required for exclusively unrecognized bragging rights is astronomical. Even good players capable of doing so just aren't interested in going back into content that they've spent months in just to spend 3 more months in that trial progressing slightly more difficult strats. Replayability in ESO right now is currently created by the players, not by the game. So there hasn't been replayability in endgame content for a long time. The only thing that kept players here was difficulty. I need to emphasize, I do not think that difficulty is a good thing to crutch on. However, it's all we've had. The trifecta for Lucent Citadel was achieved in about 3 weeks on the PTS cycle, and on day 1, 5 teams got it done, and on console, the trifecta was achieved in less than a week. We went in, we played the game for a month, now we're done and everyone's on a break. I think content a little more difficult than Lucent Citadel, maybe somewhere between Lucent and Sanity's Edge, but continuing with the unique style and mechanical feel of Lucent Citadel would be the perfect middle ground. But again, hinging on content difficulty on its own is a recipe for disaster. So the solution to this problem is extremely complicated. In my opinion, it's time for ESO to move on from the trifecta style of endgame content. WoW progressions, for example, are far more engaging despite how much more vastly difficult they are and the time that they require. The world's first in WoW took over 160 hours with 400 pulls on the final boss out of 8 alone. Mentally speaking though, it's way less draining to spend 400 pulls on a single boss when every 10 to 20 pulls you see something new. The Zoran progression in terms of clearing for the first time was rough, but extremely engaging for this reason. However, it's worth noting that with the very end of that fight being the key thing that needs progression for the trifecta style of raiding, it's very frustrating to do 8 minutes of filler fight just to be able to prog the part that you need to no death. So we go from a really fun fight to progress on hard mode into a really annoying fight to progress a trifecta in. And on that note, trifecta progs in ESO require you to see the exact same fight over and over and over again and do it until it's just perfect. Again, compared to the clear-oriented style of raiding where maybe it takes more pulls to clear one boss, but you're introduced to new mechanics until you get a little bit better at the fight, until you finally get the adrenaline rush of just clearing the boss. The trifecta style just gets boring and is a format that is far less engaging. I don't know the validity to this, but I hear WoW had a similar structure to trifectas years ago in their heroic raids, before introducing a brand new type of endgame content in mythic raiding. Perhaps it's time for ESO to make a similar move. If not, a band-aid solution that would require far less cost and resources that could at least poke at nostalgia in the meantime could revolve around older content. Let me make clear, I don't think that adding hard modes or making old trials more difficult on its own is a great idea. It's good to have a ladder of progression that players can climb. But what if, with every major update, every quarter year, one trial from the past gets rebalanced for today's damage, with maybe a couple of new mechanics and or hard modes, and is available just for that patch like a season? In Update 45, endgamers get Moss Super Hard Mode for 3 months only, and we integrate a special trials vendor with some insane rewards associated with score and achievements during that time. Something like that could at least work for a little while a long-term solution to replayability is developed. Because, to be completely honest, the best solution is just more content. 1 trial and 2 dungeons a year is not enough. We need more. Content could be easier than Lucent Citadel if we got even 2 trials a year, or 1 large-scale trial and 1 mini trial. People have been asking for another mini trial in the endgame scene for forever. I mean, we are killing Zamaja in almost 60 seconds. This content is old. Keeping endgamers happy with new content like this is important because if endgamers stop playing the game, nobody is around to help train a new generation. I heard horror stories involving the new trial where I've claimed it's the easiest day 1 trifecta to date. This isn't hard to prove, it is just objectively true. Yet I hear story after story of groups who have cleared difficult content struggling to get even the hard mode done. Meanwhile, as someone experienced in the content and in endgame in general, I led a group that had a CP 400 healer, a tank who had never done any hard mode trial content, and a group of players whose most recent trifecta was Godslayer or a difficulty equivalent, and get the hard mode clear done in 2 months, raiding only 2 days a week, very inconsistently, with tons of subs. If players that are experienced quit playing the game simply because they don't have a reason to, nobody will be around to help other players learn and grow like this. And on the topic of nostalgia, I think the element to ESO that players miss the absolute most is the way combat used to be. It's just gotten so old, boring, and most of all, repetitive. Almost every single class from the meta standpoint plays in a near identical way, and this is not an exaggeration. They all feel the exact same, and before the timer changes that came many patches ago, this wasn't the case. The classes need revamped. I mean, especially with hybridization, the same 4 to 5 skills are meta on every class except the Arcanist, and these classes in general have one important short timer: Talons, Power the Light, Daedric Prey, Shocks, Merciless Resolve, and then one 15-second timer in Wall, Stampede, Endless Hail, followed by a bunch of 20-second timers in Trap, Degen, Scalding Rune, or even more class specifically, Ritual, Eruption, Fulminating Rune, Siphon, Debilitate, or Scamp, just to name a few. All of this for every class followed by a 1-second spammable. If you can master one class, you've mastered 6. And really, you've mastered 12 specs, 12 of the 14 in fact. Fundamentally, dealing damage in ESO is the same on every class. Watch your timers, reapply your abilities when they expire, use your 1-second spammable when no dots need to be reapplied. The Arcanist was so popular simply because it was different. I personally love the class. I think min-maxing it is extremely intricate and that there's always a better way to do a fight with it. But the 5-second spammable has become very dull and boring to the vast majority of endgame players. They're sick of it, but they also don't want to play a CPM class because they all play the exact same way. I remember a time when we had mag and stam comps, and mag used staves and wall and required totally different support setups than the melee-based stam classes that used rending slashes and a bow or greatsword, uppercut, all these cool things. Everything is so mind-numbingly similar now. I hate to draw another comparison to WoW, but another hugely cool thing about the recent update is the introduction of a brand new tree that totally changed every class's rotation. Something similar could do wonders for ESO, even something that brings back the 14 specs ESO could have instead of the simple 7 that we do. I mean, the mag and stam interactions are so freaking similar that the biggest names in content creation find it more efficient to just make a Templar guide as opposed to a Magplar and Stamplar guide. There are a lot of cool things that came out of hybridization, the most notable being the fact that so many different sets are the best set to use in a very specific situation for a very specific purpose. This is really cool. However, all classes feeling like they play the same way at a fundamental level due to hybridization is something that needs addressed. The final problem that I want to address is the new player experience from the lens of a player aspiring to get into raiding in ESO. Perhaps the only thing that's kept endgamers in ESO for this long is how different it feels compared to other MMOs. I've made tons of comparisons to WoW here, but make no mistake. To me, this game is just so much better. It's so much more engaging, so much more fun, and it's mostly because of the combat system. Even in its dullest iteration, it is still by far the most engaging combat out of any MMO. This entire 10-year anniversary was advertised as "You Belong," which is a great message, and one that I assume was targeted at drawing in new players to the wonderful community that's been created here. But outside of that, this game is so marketable to players who just want to raid or do PvP as well. Not enough attention is brought to how good the combat system is. This tangent aside, the point that I'm getting to is that it feels very strange that new players are marketed to so much, yet the new player experience is maybe the worst of all. I've heard so many people say that they feel they just straight up cannot recommend this game to people because of the grind required to raid. It's just simply absurd. For context, I've leveled 3 accounts between Xbox and PC, and I have nearly 30 characters. If I were to absolutely min-max leveling a new account, and I mean get myself as much of an XP boost as possible and comp out a buddy so that he can do BRP rounds in 30 seconds or less, it will still take 40 to 50 hours for me to get to a comfortable raid CP of mindlessly farming the same 30-second wave of ads. There is zero chance new players have the knowledge or resources to make it that short of a grind. On top of that, even if you've been playing the game, I recently had to make an Arc tank on PC where I would have needed to farm mages, fighters, Psijic, Undaunted, and Assault and Support on top of leveling a character and leveling skills, and then do scribing for a tank and farm out 150 skill points. Or spend $250. I mean, that is just insane at this point in the game's life. I get having to do the guilds once, but $100 for my skill lines and another 75 for enough skill points is just unreal. Getting raid ready in ESO takes months and can just feel impossible. I had to take a week off to have the time to do it, even buying a lot of these things. And that's a great transition into what I hope is the best solution for the game. We've talked about all of the major reasons that I feel players have left or are leaving the game right now. I've also presented a variety of solutions. However, anyone with any sense would recognize that some of the best solutions I feel I've presented likely require a good bit of money dumped into them. Love it or hate it, money is what makes the world go round, and properly monetizing your product or service is the foundation of even being able to think about making your product better. Now, ESO is maybe one of the most poorly monetized video games I've seen in recent times. Not even because it's inherently bad or takes advantage of players in ways that a lot of people complain about, but more so that it just hasn't kept up with the times. 2020 to 2022 was maybe one of the most significant milestones of gaming history that I've witnessed in my life, and it was all centered around Fortnite. They released a free-to-play game that absolutely blew up, introduced a cosmetic system of monetization that we've seen in many games before, but beyond that, cleverly made the most money out of nearly any game ever by utilizing an optional battle pass system, sectioned through seasoned exclusivity. That's a lot of words. In short, Fortnite offered a cheap battle pass that gave a ton of cool and exclusive cosmetic rewards that were earnable by playing the game, and whose top reward was a spectacular skin that you could only obtain if you hit the highest tier of the battle pass in that season. It's living proof that you can have cool and exclusive rewards that make players feel special and that they can show off, while also having an extremely successful and lucrative cosmetic shop. The seasonal system has been integrated successfully into some of the biggest games in the world. You'll find battle passes from big games like Call of Duty to mobile games like Clash of Clans. ESO relies far too much on its crown store, and while crown crates and cosmetics are probably monetized better than any other MMO, there are far more things ESO could be doing to be making more money to make creating the necessary content far easier. It blows my mind that ESO's not hopped on the seasonal trend that's emerged in gaming, and even directly included battle passes for PvP gaming. Again, in Fortnite, Call of Duty, or Clash of Clans, I can receive a few cool rewards for playing the game in a season for free, but get a bunch of cool shit for buying the battle pass for $5, $10, maybe $15, and those passes offer so many things that buying it feels like an absolute no-brainer, like I'm getting my money's worth. For ESO, you could include a bunch of mats, geodes, recipes, or whatever, in addition to some cool skins, polymorphs, skill styles, crown crates, or anything in between that you would get for buying the battle pass and then leveling the tiers. It's easy free money. Part of the sell, though, is making exclusive rewards, which I'm not sure ESO is willing to do. This maybe made sense to me in the past, where ESO was a game that you could keep up with and beat as a new player. You can't beat this game anymore, though. It's 10 years old. You can choose a path that you like, whether it's questing, raiding, PvPing, and then you can focus on doing cool new things. Like, I can't stress this enough. This game is 10 years old. The draw shouldn't be for new players to come in and try to go earn all of the things that we did 8 years ago. And this isn't the only way. There are so many more avenues ESO could explore to make more money. For example, I can't quite understand why ESO wouldn't monetize its membership the same way that WoW does, especially as an optional membership. If ESO were to create a universal guild trader of sorts that standardized the gold prices of Crown Store items and ESO Plus tokens, for example, more people would buy ESO Plus. Everybody that had ESO Plus now would continue to obtain it, whether it be by individual purchase or by purchasing it for gold through someone else's credit card. And in addition to that, people who simply play the game a ton would buy ESO Plus from someone else as well, which just translates to more memberships. To be frank, it would also be a good move to increase the ethical standing of the company, because when a company offers something like their subscription service as something that you can earn in the game, it makes people look at you in a better light. A universal guild trader not only opens the opportunity to increase the money spent on subscriptions and Crown Store items, but also gives an opportunity to control the in-game economy if warranted, and even to control illegal gold selling, putting a different price on the cost of gold and making the most easy and accessible way to do it legally with ESO Plus tokens. Furthermore, ESO can monetize a variety of services that don't exist in the game. I maintain that the cost of skill lines is far too much, but reducing the cost of those and adding services such as learning all the lore books that you've discovered on separate characters for X amount of crowns is something that I would pay for to be able to use more as Whisper. Offering a leveled character the same way WoW does, or even the ability to pay for characters to transfer through servers, could be very enticing. There are a limitless amount of services that don't exist in ESO that people would gladly pay for. In terms of real reward incentives, I would love to see ESO far better monetized so that more content can emerge far more consistently. We are at the end. I know that was a lot, but if you made it here, thank you so much for taking the time to hear me out, and most importantly, voice your opinions in the comments and in the forums. Perhaps another fault of ESO is that they tend to move a little slow, but they do move and they do listen, and change does happen. I promise you that. Your points just need to be clear, reasonable, and respectful. And if they see enough of us share these same concerns, change will come, as it has many times in the past. I want to stress again, I don't think that this game is dead, but I do think it's dying. A series of good changes and good updates, though, can bring a game back from the grave just as easily as a few bad updates can kill it, so I won't lose hope. In the meantime, thank you so much for all of your love and support. I seriously appreciate each and every one of you, and I will see you in the next one.